Did you catch the news this morning? A young African president stood before the world, looked Trump in the eye, and said what many have been too afraid to say for years. This wasn't a rumor or an anonymous source. It was real, and it sent shockwaves through global politics. Few would dare to speak up like that, but Ibrahim Traoré did. President of Burkina Faso, just past 30, dressed in military uniform, calm and composed amid a crowd of tailored suits. A man from a country often overlooked by the media, yet today, every eye was on him. It all happened at the Global Leadership Summit in Geneva, a gathering of the world's most influential people. Presidents, prime ministers, billionaires, and tech moguls sat side by side beneath chandeliers worth more than most villages. Officially, the agenda was about peace, development, and the future of humanity. But no one expected anything truly bold. Until now, Traoré didn't attend to shake hands and pose for photos. He came to say something that made the room go silent. Stay with us, because what happened next may be remembered for years to come. Just minutes into the summit, the lights dimmed, and the first major speaker approached the stage. It was Donald Trump, known worldwide for his blunt speech, bold opinions, and signature suit. He scanned the luxurious hall filled with leaders, paused dramatically, and made a remark that would ripple far beyond that room. "When you look at Africa," he said casually, "you just see chaos and corruption. No one knows who's in charge. Honestly, it's a mess. A total disaster." There were a few uneasy laughs. Some leaders shifted in their seats, unsure whether to respond, ignore, or pretend they hadn't heard. A few nodded slightly, perhaps out of habit or to avoid standing out. Cameras flickered, eyes moved. The elegant setting suddenly felt colder, more rigid. But on the far side of the room, Ibrahim Traoré remained still. He didn't smile or glance around. He simply rose, calmly, deliberately, as if he'd been waiting for that exact moment. The quiet sound of his boots on the polished floor broke the silence. Heads turned. Security straightened. Reporters grabbed their pens. One by one, everyone watched as he moved toward the center aisle. Unhurried, unwavering. Each step said everything. At the front, he stopped just short of the podium. He didn't reach for the mic or fix his uniform. He just looked directly at Trump, held eye contact, and said, "With all due respect, Mr. Trump, you have no idea what Africa truly is." The room froze. You could hear people inhale. Heads turned so quickly it was audible. Some gasped quietly, others instinctively reached for their phones. Media lights flared red as cameras rolled. Traoré wasn't shouting, he wasn't angry. But with that single sentence, he broke through a silence that had lasted for decades. His uniform stood out among the formal suits. The Burkina Faso flag on his chest shone under the spotlight. He stood tall, steadfast, as though carrying generations on his shoulders. And rather than bending under the weight, he rose higher. Now, every camera pointed at him. The whispering stopped. What began as just another high-level summit had shifted. The air no longer felt scripted, it felt raw, real, charged with truth. Then Traoré stepped slightly forward, not toward Trump, but toward the center of the room. The space opened before him like a stage, and with every eye watching, he began to speak. Not in fury, not to provoke, but with calm, steady clarity. It cut sharper than any shout ever could. Africa is not chaos. Africa is not corruption. Africa is legacy. Africa is strength. The room remained silent, but this time, it wasn't the uneasy kind. It was the silence that falls when people recognized they're witnessing something too important to ignore. Traoré didn't glance at notes. He had none. His voice was calm, his words deliberate. It felt less like he was addressing the room and more like he was speaking through it. To something older, larger. "When your ancestors arrived on our lands, they didn't find disorder," he said. "They encountered civilizations, rich in gold, in knowledge, in governance. Kingdoms that traded, healed, taught, and lived in harmony. What followed wasn't cooperation, it was exploitation. He paused. You drew borders with no regard for language, culture, or history. You enslaved generations. And when we finally gained independence, we inherited institutions never meant to serve us. Systems designed for collapse. Some faces twitched with discomfort. Others leaned forward, drawn in. His words stripped away diplomatic niceties and revealed the truth beneath the surface. Yes, we face challenges, Traoré continued. But ask yourselves, why? Your smartphones run on our minerals. Your desserts rely on our cocoa. Your factories and vehicles are fueled by our oil. He let that contrast settle in the room, hanging in the air like smoke. And yet, he went on, our children often eat once a day, if at all. Our graduates walk the streets with no jobs waiting. Our hospitals go without medicine, while our resources enrich your nations. Some leaders looked down. A few exchanged tense glances. No one spoke. No one interrupted. You call us corrupt, he said slowly. But what do you call the Western corporations that pay bribes to take what's ours? What do you call the offshore accounts where African billions vanish? The banks that welcome money stolen by our dictators? The silence when wars erupt over contracts drafted in your boardrooms? Even the journalists, seasoned and usually detached, scribbled faster now. Traoré had never raised his voice, yet the entire room seemed to vibrate with the weight of what had gone unspoken for decades. He wasn't delivering accusations carelessly. He was holding up a mirror, one the world had long avoided. Still, he spoke with no bitterness, only clarity. This was not a plea for pity, but a call for accountability. Beyond those walls, across towns and cities in Africa, millions would soon hear these words, spoken not behind closed doors, but at the very center of power. Traoré let the silence breathe, just long enough for the truth to land deep. Then, in a softer tone, he said, "Let me share a story, a real one." His voice didn't seek drama, it sought connection, something often missing in rooms where policies forget people. There's a boy in a small village in Burkina Faso. His name is Malik. He's 12. The name alone gave him weight. Malik wasn't a statistic. He wasn't a headline. He was someone's son. Every morning before sunrise, Malik wakes. He doesn't prepare for school. He takes a plastic container and walks 6 miles, barefoot, not to play, but to collect water for his mother and younger siblings. Traoré paused. Not for effect, but because the silence was now absolute. No shifting chairs, no camera clicks. On the way, he passes gold mines, hills gleaming with wealth. Gold that leaves our lands for your jewelry, your electronics, your private vaults. Gold he will never touch. Someone in the front row wiped their eyes. Still, Traoré remained still, his expression unreadable. When Malik returns, he eats a small meal, sometimes none. Then, by candlelight, if there's any wax left, he studies. He doesn't dream of Europe. He doesn't want to escape. He dreams of becoming an engineer, not to leave Africa, but to rebuild it. To dig wells so no child walks 6 miles. To construct roads and hospitals so his village can live with dignity. Traoré paused again. That dream isn't a visa. It's not a flight out. It's justice. It's dignity. A quiet breath rippled through the audience. Some looked down. Others looked up and saw more than a president. They saw a man carrying the weight of children like Malik. Even the journalists, trained to stay objective, faltered. One woman lowered her pen. Another cleaned her glasses, but not for clarity. Still, Traoré stood firm, calm, eyes clear, his voice low yet louder than any before. You ask why we are angry, he said. We're not. We're awake. Malik doesn't need pity. He needs power. He needs opportunity. A future that isn't stolen before it starts. That closing line didn't just hang in the air, it settled into the chest. It wasn't just about Malik. It spoke to millions. To every child overlooked until they grow up empty-handed. And there, in a room built for handshakes and hollow promises, Traoré gave back a truth that couldn't be unheard. Malik's story hadn't simply touched hearts. It shook something deeper. But Traoré wasn't done. He had stirred the room with pain. Now he would confront it with facts. He turned toward the world leaders, not as a man asking for aid, but as one holding up a mirror. What he said next drew even the back row forward. "You speak of corruption," he began, "as if it's ours, but it was created by you." Some shifted in their seats, others froze. "It doesn't begin in remote villages. It's protected in your financial systems, written into your legal frameworks, hidden in the tax shelters you design." A few advisors exchanged worried glances. Traoré continued, his tone steady, his gaze firm. "The money stolen from Africa isn't stored in Africa. It sits in your capitals, under your lights, in your glass towers. Corruption doesn't start in Kinshasa. It starts in Brussels, in Washington, in Dubai." These words didn't echo, they landed. Our leaders take bribes, but who pays them? Western oil giants, mining conglomerates, arms traders. "You call us weak, yet it was you who forged the chains." He lifted his hand slightly, as if drawing open a curtain. "Right now, as I speak, children in Burkina Faso are digging for gold with bare hands. That gold will never fund their schools. It will end up in the accounts of men in Geneva. A boy named Malik walks past those mines every morning. His father died in one, buried alive in a collapse that was never reported. He worked for a foreign company that fled the country without offering so much as an apology. Malik's school has no roof. His dreams have no shelter. And still we're told to be patient." He paused, scanning the room, as if daring someone to disagree. "That boy doesn't need pity. He needs power. Not a charity campaign, not a trending hashtag. He needs the world to stop taking what was never theirs." Comment 1. If you believe Traoré speaks the truth, the world keeps choosing to ignore. You say Africa has failed, but how can a tree grow if its roots are constantly cut? Every time we rise, you change the rules. Every time we build, you move the goalposts. Every time we dream, you buy the land beneath our feet. A quiet gasp came from somewhere in the audience. No one laughed. No one interrupted. "Africa was never given a fair chance to succeed," Traoré said, his voice now quieter but weighed down with history. "From colonial flags to IMF loans, from biased deals to silenced voices, we were given a broken system and blamed for its faults." He paused again, letting the silence speak for itself. "We are asking for the space to breathe, to create, to rise." His words weren't shouted, but they echoed louder than any anthem played at that summit. This was no longer just a speech. It had become something more. The room felt changed, like history had just shifted. And then came the final words that sealed it. "We are not asking for permission. Africa is ready to rise, and I, Ibrahim Traoré, will rise first." There was a moment of silence, then a single clap, then another, and suddenly the entire room erupted. Presidents from Latin America stood first, their eyes filled with something deeper than respect. Ministers from across Asia followed, applauding with raised hands. Even some members of the European delegation stood, some slowly, as if realizing they had just witnessed a turning point. Some clapped with hesitation, others with pride, but the standing ovation swept across the room like a wave no one could stop. Cameras flashed, journalists scribbled urgently, social media lit up before the summit had even ended. Within minutes, the hashtag Traoré Speaks Truth was trending, first in Nairobi, then Johannesburg, then Lagos. By the end of the hour, it had crossed continents, appearing on screens in Sao Paulo, London, and New York. Clips of the speech flooded timelines. One video showing the moment Traoré declared Africa was never allowed to succeed hit 1 million views before he even left the building. The impact was immense. Across African universities, students gathered in dorm rooms and cafeterias to re-watch the moment. Some sat in silence, others erupted in cheers. In Ghana, a political science class paused mid-lecture to project the speech onto the wall. In Nigeria, a rapper dropped a freestyle titled "Stand First," using Traoré's closing words as its chorus. In Kenya, A school teacher printed the full transcript and handed it out as a reading assignment. This, she told her students, is what courage looks like. In Senegal, a street artist painted a mural overnight, Traoré standing tall, surrounded by children holding books and tools instead of weapons. The words, not waiting, rising, stretched across the painted sky. Even outside Africa, the response was remarkable. International media revised their headlines. Traoré confronts world leaders and earns their respect. From military uniform to global icon, Burkina Faso's voice starts a movement. Activists, influencers, and scholars who had long remained silent about African issues were suddenly quoting him, tagging his name, analyzing his words. People who had never even heard of Burkina Faso were searching for it, eager to learn more. The surprise wasn't that Traoré had spoken, it was that he had spoken with such clarity. And for once, the world had truly listened. Back home, the reaction was electric. In Ouagadougou, thousands poured into the streets. Some waved flags. Others held up phones playing the speech again and again. Murals appeared overnight, T-shirts bearing Traoré's image, and the words, "Traoré speaks truth," sold out in hours. At school assemblies, children reenacted the speech. Local radio stations aired excerpts between music. Elders spoke his name with pride. Youth wore it like a badge of honor. El didn't just speak for himself, one caller said during a live broadcast. He spoke for Malik, for my son, for all of us. But the movement didn't stop with applause. A week later, Traoré announced a bold initiative, Africa First. The goals were clear. Keep African resources in African hands. Cancel unfair contracts with foreign corporations. Enforce genuine anti-corruption policies, starting with his own government. Launch scholarships, startup funds, and youth development programs. Investigate offshore accounts and bring stolen wealth back home. Suddenly, other nations took notice. Ghana, Ethiopia, Tanzania, even resource-rich Nigeria sent delegations to Burkina Faso. They didn't come to offer help, they came to align. "We are not poor," a leader declared at a regional summit. "We are rich, nations with futures stolen. It's time to reclaim them." And at the heart of this movement was Traoré. Once dismissed as a populist, he's now seen by many as a visionary, and to some, even more than that. He's known across the continent as the African Lion. One young woman from Dakar tweeted, "Not because he roars, but because he protects." That image resonated with millions. Artists, teachers, laborers, and children alike embraced it. Traoré wasn't flawless, but he showed up. He was present. He entered rooms where his voice wasn't expected, and when he spoke, it was impossible to ignore. While Trump declined to make any further comments, the reality was, it didn't matter anymore. The focus had shifted. The center had moved. Africa wasn't waiting to be rescued. It was rising. It was building. And finally, it was being heard. Traoré didn't stop after the applause. The moment he stepped off that summit stage, he was already moving forward. His speech in Geneva had made headlines, yes, but once the cameras turned away, he returned to his country. To the dust, the desks, the fractured systems still in place. That's where leadership truly began. The Africa First initiative evolved from concept to implementation. Traoré championed new mining regulations favoring local ownership. He enacted anti-corruption reforms that didn't spare even his closest allies. He launched youth development programs, funding startups, training engineers, and expanding scholarship access for dreamers like Malik, who studied under candlelight. But the movement wasn't confined within national borders. It sparked momentum across the continent, from Ghana to Ethiopia, Senegal to Nigeria. Governments began reassessing their agreements. Leaders who had once only whispered frustrations over foreign dominance were now speaking publicly, citing Traoré's words. More importantly, they were acting on them. What set this apart wasn't just new laws. It was renewed conviction, a belief that Africa need not replicate anyone, nor ask permission to reclaim what has always belonged to it. Still, Traoré never presented himself as the solution. He was the beginning of a larger question, one that Africa's youth would have to answer. In his speeches and interviews, he often said, "I can't fix Africa. No leader can. but I can light the torch and pass it on. And they accepted it. In towns, cities, classrooms, and markets, people stopped waiting. They created, they organized, they challenged, they built. The continent wasn't suddenly healed, but it had stirred awake. The world watched, uncertain whether to applaud or brace for change, because something had shifted. Africa was no longer asking. She was taking her place. And this time, she was not doing so in silence, not with noise or fury, but with focus, determination, and eyes fully open. Africa isn't asking to be acknowledged anymore. She's already standing. And she's not stepping back. Subscribe to our channel to follow the real stories of Traoré and Africa's awakening. Every time he speaks, the world pays attention. See you in the next story, where truth always finds its voice. Africa first. The program, Start Task Force. The Corona. Movement. Leadership. No permission needed.